to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. This is the podcast for land surveyors that own or want to own a small business. My name is Landon Blake. I am your podcast host. Let's dive right into today's episode. The title of this episode is Understanding the Business of ALTA Surveys. I believe this is episode 41. And this is going to be a public episode that'll be available to everybody. Couple quick reminders. One is I'm working on my word whiskers. So thumb, Be patient with me. I think I'm beginning to bring the number of those down. It's funny, I've been working with an AI tool called Descript, and it allows you to remove what it calls filler words, and it gives you a count. And it's amazing that in 15 or 20 minutes I can have 230 word whiskers or filler words, which is crazy. And then I want to remind you guys, if you're a regular listener of the podcast, please jump on our On Point Workshops Patreon page and sign up for a monthly subscription, $10 a month. You can help support the podcast. I'm not trying to pay for my time. I'm just trying to help pay a little bit for Carly, who helps with the show notes and the website and cover some of the hosting costs and the software costs that I've got. So if you can, if you can hook me up with the value of a cheeseburger and fries. I don't even know. Can you even get a cheeseburger and fries for $10 anymore? If you've got that in your budget, I would appreciate it. You can show me that you enjoy the podcast. I'll start with a story. It's a true story. It's not much of a story. It's more of an anecdote or an example. This happened. This happened a couple weeks ago. Let's see. Yeah, maybe 2 weeks ago, almost exactly. So I got this call. Let's see. Memorial Day was on the 26th. It's May 2025. Memorial Day was on the 26th. So I got this call on Tuesday the 20th, I think. I got an email. Sorry, it was an email from a. I don't know if they're a land development company. They're like a real estate investment trust, an REIT. So I got a call from one of their managers there. And he said, I've got a parcel it was in Southern California. So I got a parcel in Southern California, and I need an ALTA survey. And I said, man, that's a long drive for us. That's 7 hours. I'm not saying that we won't go, but it's a long ways. I said, do you mind if I ask, why are you calling me? He said, well, I saw on your website, that you guys can do ALTA surveys in a fairly quick turnaround time. And he said, I can't get anybody local to call me back. And I said, okay. He said, well, tell me a little bit about, what you need. I said, can you send me a title report? Can you send me a table A? The table A items being requested by the lender. He said, I don't have a title report. I don't have table A items. He said, all I have is the street address. I said, okay, well, give me the street address to start. I said, when do you need this done? He said, well, we need it done in a hurry. We're trying to close escrow. I said, okay, so right now, I think I can do it in 10 business days, which is pretty fast. It wasn't a huge parcel. It was a commercial parcel. He said, well, your website says you could do them in 5 days. I said, well, we do sometimes do it in 5 days. I said, but I have to eat a day, there's a day of travel down and a day of travel back for you, and that's if I can do it in one trip. If the bank wants monuments set, then there's a second trip. That's another 2 days down and back. There's 4 days of travel, and you want a 5-day turnaround potentially. He said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. He said, well, do me a favor, give me a price for 10-day and give me a price for 5-day, assuming you guys only had to make one trip. I said, okay, I could do that. When are you closing escrow? He says, well, we want to close escrow by the end of this month. And I chuckled a little bit. I said, it's Tuesday, May 20th, and Monday is Memorial Day, bro. He's like, yeah, I know. I was like, all right, well, I don't even know if I can do that. I said, we close for Memorial Day, and most of my employees have plans, and I don't know. I got to talk to my partner. He said, okay, we'll see what you can do. Let me know. All right, so I talked to my partner, and we decided we would try and accommodate this guy, but, we were going to charge him a good, healthy price. He's calling for a 5-day ALTA, right before Memorial Day weekend. And he doesn't have half of what I need to give him a good price estimate. So I gave him some ballpark pricing. And he emailed me back and said, wow, this is really expensive. So I replied to his email and I said, yeah, you want a 5-day turnaround on an ALTA survey right before Memorial Day weekend, and you don't have a title report or a table A yet. He said, bro, I'm going to have to ask one or two of my people to cancel their holiday plans and work on Memorial Day. We are going to work, 7 12-hour days in a row to get this done, field and office. And it's 7 hours away. Don't call here and ask me for a coupon deal. That's ridiculous, bro. I was like, this is the price. I'm not reducing the price. He was actually a reasonable guy. He's like, yeah, you're right. I understand all that. Thank you for explaining it to me. Which was not the reaction I expected. He was a gentleman and a scholar. He said, man, I can't authorize this much money. He says, I gotta run this up to my executive management team. He said, well, I'll let you know. I said, okay. I said, hey, you want this done? I need to know in the next 24 hours if you guys are doing this or not. So I didn't hear anything. So I knew by, Thursday morning that we weren't getting the survey, which was okay because we didn't really want to go to Southern California on Memorial Day weekend. Deal with the traffic, the lodging costs were going to be more, the whole thing, whole deal. So just for kicks, when I got in on Tuesday, I sent him an email the following Tuesday. I said, hey, I assume you found somebody to do this. And can you just confirm for me? And he was kind enough to email me back. He said, yeah, we found another company that said that they could do this, for less money than you guys. I said, okay, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. Now, I don't know who they found to go do an ALTA survey. He actually said, this weekend we found somebody. So they found some surveyor that answered the phone on the weekend and agreed to go do an ALTA survey on Memorial Day weekend. And I don't even know, most companies can't turn ALTA surveys around in the time frames we can because of the way we have our company set up. I'm in shock that they found somebody. Now, part of me wonders, are they really going to manage to pull that off? This is a client that didn't even have a preliminary title report yet. So anyways, I wasn't upset. The guy was polite. I do that, once a month or once every 2 months. I go through a similar scenario like this. But one of the things that crossed my mind when that happened was, this is a real estate investment trust. These are big boys. These are supposed to be sophisticated players, and they're calling up to order an ALTA survey. They don't have a title report or a table A item. And they need it in 5 days on right before Memorial Day weekend. Who runs a real estate investment trust like that? I just don't understand. And I don't understand. Part of what that goes to show, I hope, is that the ALTA survey the market marketplace for ALTA surveys is essentially broken, and that has a lot to do with some really bad incentives. It's partly ignorance, and it's partly really bad financial incentives that some of the players have. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the podcast. Here's what we're going to go over in this episode. We're going to briefly go over 3 definitions. We're going to talk about why is this topic important for our businesses and for our profession. I'll tell you what we're not going to talk about today. We're going to follow the money, because it's always important to do that. And we have a little diagram that we're going to try and look at. We're going to talk about, 8 or 9 ways the ALTA survey marketplace in the United States is broken. In other words, it doesn't function like an efficient, capitalist market should work. A capitalism marketplace. So because of some bad incentives, it just doesn't function like it should. It's like our healthcare system in America. People like to say we have a free market healthcare system in America. We don't. We have a heavily government subsidized, over-regulated healthcare system. So the market for ALTA surveys is kind of the same way. And some of that is just market concentration with the title companies. So there's some monopoly power there to some extent. We'll get to that. All right, let's see here. I'm going to go over some definitions. So we're going to... there's a so. Let me take that so back. I got 3 terms we're going to define. ALTA survey. I don't want to go into depth on that. I assume if you're listening to this episode, you have a rough idea what an ALTA survey is. I know I do have non-surveyors that listen to the podcast, so I'm going to briefly describe that or define that. An ALTA survey is a special type of survey that we do. It's a boundary survey that shows detailed information about the easements, leases, and other encumbrances on the property. It shows any major physical features within 5 feet of either side of the property line. And the whole purpose of an ALTA survey is to remove an exception from the land title insurance coverage policy that the lender is requiring to loan money on the property. So we really only do ALTA surveys when there's a loan, and they're really only done in the United States for commercial properties. They're not done for residential properties. That's what an ALTA survey is. Special type of survey, special specification you have to follow, very high level of liability for land surveyors, and typically awarded on low bid, which we'll talk about. So whenever you see a very complicated work product that involves a lot of liability being bought and sold based on low bid, you probably have a broken marketplace. When I talk about the business of ALTA surveys in the title, what does that mean when I talk about the business of ALTA surveys? I mean how ALTA surveys are bought, sold, and provided. Who's doing those things? That's the follow the money part, right? Who's asking for the ALTA? Who's paying for it? Who's benefiting from it? Who's selling it? You might think it's me. Like the land surveyor is selling the ALTA, but that's not always the case, actually. We might talk about that a little bit. And then when we get to the follow the money part, we're also going to talk about what I call the pay benefit matrix, and that isn't actually mine. That actually, I was taught about that from a land surveyor named Ron Nelms, and I don't think the idea originated with Ron either. I think Ron is a pretty good business person, and I think Ron was a pretty good business person, and he had learned that somewhere, and then he was shared it at a survey conference when I was a young surveyor, and I really appreciated it. We'll talk about buying bras for the Army, which is a good illustration of the matrix. He told that story about the buying bras for the Army. That's part of the reason why I still remember it to this day. It's a slightly politically incorrect analogy, but I think we can use it since this is a a personal podcast. I think we can do that. We'll talk a little bit more about the pay benefit matrix when we get to the follow the money section of the podcast. But essentially, the pay benefit matrix helps you think about who's paying for your survey. It could be any product, but who's paying for your survey, who's benefiting from your survey. Are those the same people, and are they the different people, and how does that affect the transaction? And it's a little 4x4 matrix. Why is this important? Why is it important to us as small business owners? And why is it important to us as land surveyors, as professionals, as a profession? Why is this important? I have 3 reasons why the fact that the ALTA survey market is broken might be important to land surveyors. One is, it's the most common type of boundary survey we do in the United States. I don't know. Maybe we do more lot surveys. But certainly by dollar value, we do more ALTA surveys than we do any other type of boundary survey by dollar value, without a doubt. So most of the dollar value of land in the United States that gets surveyed every year is surveyed because an ALTA survey is being asked for. So it's not because the owner wants to know where their property lines are at, or it's not because somebody's trying to build a parking lot. It's not because somebody's trying to subdivide. Like, most of the boundary surveying in the United States is being done to remove an exception from a land title insurance policy, which is kind of weird when you think about it. So it's important. It's a huge amount of the boundary surveying that gets done in the United States in any given calendar year. It's also a large portion of revenue for survey-only businesses. So if you don't have a civil engineering side to your business, if you're survey only, you probably do a fair amount of ALTA surveys. We're not doing as many of them as we used to. But when the first 2 or 3 years of your business, we were doing 1 ALTA survey a month, probably. Which I know for some of you doesn't sound like a lot, but I don't do $4,500 ALTA surveys. So these were $20,000 to $50,000 ALTA surveys. And we were doing 1 a month. I still do, 3 or 4 of them a year, maybe. But a lot of survey-only businesses do a ton. They do a lot of ALTA surveys. So they're important. And we talked about this. The marketplace is broken. It doesn't function with the proper incentives like you would expect of a market in a capitalist economy. There's some really warped incentives. There's some monopoly power. There's some ignorance. So think about that. Most of the land that we survey in the United States, and most of the work being done by small survey-only companies, is being done in a broken marketplace. That is not healthy for the profession. That's part of why I wanted to talk about it. And I didn't understand this all, guys. Like when I became a surveyor, it took me years and years of doing ALTA surveys and interacting with the parties and learning about the real estate system in the United States and learning about real estate financing and learning about land title insurance to put all these pieces together and be able to figure out what I'm trying to talk to you about today. Here's another thing I figured out that took me years and years. You don't need $1 million to get started with GIS as a small surveying or civil engineering organization. So if you're a surveyor or a civil engineer and you work in a small utility or small city or a different type of government agency, maybe you work for a small land development company, you can get started with GIS. Super easy. You don't have to spend $100,000 on an ArcGIS license. Check out QGIS. It's an open source desktop GIS. You can download it right now for free. It's an amazing program built by volunteers around the world. We use QGIS every day at Redefined Horizons. It's a great way to get started. If you're already using Google Earth, it's a pretty easy transition because QGIS can read and write KML files. If you check out QGIS and you're interested in getting some consulting help to build your first simple GIS for your organization, using QGIS, reach out to us. My team can help with that. It doesn't have to cost you $50,000. It can be a few $1,000s or several $1,000s to get guided through that first GIS design and implementation using QGIS. Check it out. Appreciate that Redefine Horizons sponsors our podcast. What are we not talking about today? We are not going to tell you how to do an ALTA survey. I wouldn't do that on this podcast anyways, but I just want to be clear, that's not what this is about. We have some great videos on the Redefine Horizons Learning channel on YouTube that talk about how to do ALTA surveys. So watch those if you're interested. We are not going to talk today about the ALTA survey specification. I'd like to do a couple episodes about the problem with specifications, and it'd be great to use the ALTA survey spec as an example of that. I'll try and remember to do that as a future episode. I think that would be great. Maybe we'll do that as a bonus episode. We're not going to talk today about how risk is transferred among the parties involved in the transaction. You have several parties in an ALTA survey. You have the surveyor. You have the seller's real estate agent or broker, the buyer's real estate agent or broker. You have the buyer, the seller. You have the bank. You have the title company. Sometimes you have law firms on each side, depending on how sophisticated the players are. It's a lot of people. They all have different incentives. They're all trying to push risk to each other. We're not going to do a deep dive on that today. I believe I also have some videos on the RH Learning channel that talk about that as well. And they might be on the main RH channel, the marketing channel. I can't remember. Anyways, if you look on the two YouTube channels, just do search for ALTA surveys. You'll find those videos. If I can remember, I'll try and ask Carly to put those in the show notes for me. Some links to some of those videos. All right, so let's talk about the money. We're going to follow the money here. We'll describe that. Who pays, who benefits matrix. 4x4 matrix or grid. So who usually pays for the ALTA survey? It's usually paid for by the buyer. Sometimes, if you're in a soft market, real estate market, the seller will pay for it, but it's usually the buyer. The buyer's paying for it because it's a condition of the financing that they're trying to acquire. So they can't get a loan until they have the ALTA survey. So the buyer's paying for it, usually. Who's benefiting primarily from the ALTA survey? You could say the title company. The title company is requiring the ALTA survey because the bank wants the survey exception removed from the title insurance company. So a lot of people would say, oh, the buyer's benefiting. No, they don't really care. A lot of buyers, if they could get their loan without an ALTA survey, they would. They're only getting an ALTA survey because the bank has a gun to their head and is telling them you got to remove the survey exception from title insurance. That's not always true. Sometimes you get a sophisticated buyer that appreciates the value of an ALTA survey. That's less than 10%. So the buyer's not the one that really wants the ALTA survey. And it's not even the title company, because the title company would be happy to give the bank title insurance with a survey exception. The only reason the title company wants the ALTA survey is because the bank wants coverage for items that might be shown on an accurate survey. So who's really benefiting from the ALTA survey? You got to drill down a couple layers there. It's the bank. The bank. The bank is the entity that is going to benefit from the ALTA survey. That makes sense, gentlemen. That's why this section, ladies and gentlemen, that's why this section is entitled Follow the Money. Whose money is on the line? It's not the buyer. And it's not the title company. It's the bank's money. That's who really cares. That's who benefits. Now, we have a problem here already because the person that's paying for the survey, the buyer, isn't the person that really benefits from the survey, which is the bank. And so anytime you get into a situation where the buyer is not the benefiter, you get screwed up incentives. See, the buyer wants to get the ALTA survey as cheaply as they can because they don't really care about it. If they could get their loan without one, they would. They absolutely don't want to pay $1 more for an ALTA survey than they have to. And the bank, who's really benefiting from the survey, I've never seen a bank have any kind of input into who gets hired to do the ALTA survey, because they're ignorant and unsophisticated. A lot of banks. And I'm not saying that to be offensive. The people at the banks that manage the bank's risk in commercial real estate transactions haven't been properly trained. Most of them, they don't even know how to read an ALTA survey. And the title insurance company really doesn't care either, because they're playing a numbers game. They're gambling. They know X amount of transactions are going to go bad, and they're just trying to get the deal closed. What they make their money on is the insurance premiums. They don't get the insurance premiums if the deal doesn't close. So there's nobody in this transaction that is really concerned or has the knowledge to obtain a quality land title survey. So now we've got a marketplace where nobody cares about the quality or has the skills to assess the quality, and the entity paying for the survey doesn't care and doesn't want to pay $1 more than they have to. And that's how you end up with a marketplace where surveyors are delivering a high liability work product or deliverable to a client that wants the absolute lowest price they can get. Right? Title companies have a monopoly, so there's not enough competition among title companies, and the banks don't, either that I don't want to say they don't get a vote. The banks aren't smart enough to know that they need a vote on who does the ALTA survey. I'll try and remember to do a PYBO Team Extra to talk about how banks could do this a little differently and make sure that they got a quality product. And they just don't do it. And I don't fully understand why. So let's talk about that. Who pays, who benefits matrix. So think about a grid with 4 squares. Okay. And on the vertical axis, we have who pays. And on the horizontal axis, we have who buys. I'll do a PYBO Team Extra and we'll put this on the whiteboard. But for now, we're going to try and describe this because I know I've got people listening to the audio only. They can't see the screen like you folks on YouTube can. Okay, so in the bottom left box, okay, so sorry, let me go back. So we have the vertical axis, who pays, the horizontal axis, who benefits. On the top row, we have the person who, let me think about how I want to describe this. Let me just try and describe the boxes. So bottom left box, we have the buyer's paying and the buyer's benefiting. So buyer over here. So the buyer pays, the buyer benefits. That's like a boundary and topo survey for a land development project, which is why we do a reasonable amount of land development surveys. Because there, if you've got a good land developer, they understand that having a good survey is going to influence project costs throughout the life of the project, and they care about that, and they also care about speed. So they care about speed and quality. They care about price too, but they also care about speed and quality. So in that situation, we have the person paying for the survey, the land developer, is also benefiting from the survey. That's the best type of client you can have. You want to be in that box. Okay. You'll notice ALTA surveys are not in that box. So now let's go up a box. Now we have the person who's buying for the survey, that the person paying for the survey, they're paying for the survey, but a different person is benefiting from the survey. This is the box that ALTA surveys are in. The buyer is paying, but the bank is the ultimate beneficiary. Okay, in that market, in that box, you get this low bid situation we want because the buyer has an incentive to spend as little money as possible because some third party is benefiting. And that's the box ALTA survey is going. Okay, then if you move over box, we've got the person who isn't paying, with their own money, and they aren't benefiting from their own money. And they're kind of agnostic. They're kind of apathetic. They don't really care what happens. They don't care about the quality, and they don't care about the price. So who might that be? That's like the buyer's real estate agent in an ALTA survey transaction. They're not paying for the survey, and they don't really care about the quality. Now, sometimes they care about just getting it done because they want the transaction closed so they can get paid, but they don't really care about the price, and they don't really care about the quality. To the extent that they care about price, maybe the seller's agent would be better. The seller's agent doesn't care. They don't care about the price or the quality. They just want the transaction to close. The seller's real estate broker. Okay, there's one other box I can't remember. What we talked about? We talked about the box where you pay but you don't benefit. We talked about the box where you benefit but don't pay. We talked about the box where you don't benefit. We talked about the box where you pay and you benefit. We talked about the box where you pay but you don't benefit. We talked about the box where you don't pay and you don't benefit. And then the other box is where you don't pay but you benefit. And that's the bank. Okay, so that's the bottom right box. That's the bank. They don't have to pay, but they're the ultimate beneficiary. Now, what that means, if you're in that box, what that means is you have to have some other way to make sure that you get a quality product, because you're not the one paying, and the person paying is going to have an incentive to get the cheapest thing they can because you're the one that benefits, but you're not paying. That's the situation the bank is in. See, banks were smarter. They would have some kind of framework in place to make sure they were getting a quality product, but they don't. I think it's mostly ignorance. Okay, so here's the story about buying bras for the Army that Ron Nelms told me that helped me remember this. You've got a purchasing agent for the Army, and he needs to buy 10,000 bras a year for the women that are being enlisted in the Army. And he's a man. So he doesn't know anything about bras. In our scenario, let's say he's a young single man. So he's not like me. He hasn't been married for 20 years. So he might not even know how to unsnap a bra. Okay? Maybe the only time he's ever seen a bra is in the JCPenney's catalog. But all of a sudden, he's got a job where he's got to buy 10,000 bras a year. Or however many the Army buys. I don't know. I don't know if the Army buys bras. But this is the point. It's a good illustration. So he's talking to his vendor that he buys uniforms from. He buys the boots and the whole uniforms, but he also buys the bras. And the guy selling the bras, the person selling the bras is also a guy. He's a 25-year-old guy. He's single. He's never seen a bra in real life either, let's say. Okay, so now we have two guys that are both ignorant, right? They have no idea how uncomfortable it is for a woman to wear a bra that doesn't fit properly. If you've been married to 25 years, especially to a woman that has any kind of well endowed chest, you know that a comfortable bra fit is very important. I'm a man, but I've been married for 25 years. To a curvy Latina girl, and I know, she's very particular about the bras that she buys, okay? Alright, so the supplier, the guy from the supplier, he's got a financial incentive. The more he sells the Army, the higher his commission is. And the guy that's buying the bras for the Army, he has an incentive. He gets a bonus if he can reduce costs from the previous year. Okay, so now we've given both these guys, they're ignorant and they've got some bad incentives potentially, right? This is just like the ALTA survey marketplace. This is why I love this illustration. So the guy selling the bras tells the guy buying the bras. The guy buying the bras tells the guy selling the bras, he says, "Hey, I need you to cut 5% off the bill for the bras this year. I'm getting pressure from my boss, and I need to find a way to reduce costs." And so the guy selling the bras stops and thinks about it for a minute. He says, "Tell you what," he says, "I can do even better than that." He says, "I'll drop my price 10% for the 10,000 bras this year, but I got to sell you a one-size-fits-all bra." And the guy buying the bras he stops and thinks for a minute, scratches his chin. He says, 10%? Guy says, yeah. He says, fantastic. When can you have them delivered? See, here's the problem. If you know anything about bras, a one-size-fits-all bra is not going to work. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all bra, boys. There just isn't. But see, we've got a couple guys here that are ignorant, and they have bad incentives, right? And the person paying isn't the person benefiting, right? So the person paying at the Army isn't benefiting from the bras that fit well, and the guy selling, like, he doesn't care what the Army gets, right? Especially if he's got a short-term timeline. Now, maybe if he has to go back and sell bras to the Army every year, then he's got a little more of an incentive to do a good job there. But in this example, let's just say that this guy knows he's going to be at a new job in 90 days. The guy selling the bras. So he don't care. He wants to get his bonus and get out of there, right? So that's a good example of how the incentives in the ALTA survey marketplace work. So there you go. Now you know what ALTA surveys and bras have in common. You probably didn't think they had things in common, but they do. Thank you to Ron Nelms for telling that story. It was, I can't remember when I heard that story if I was married yet. I think I might have been married for a couple years when I heard that story. So I may have just been beginning to learn about bras. But I remember this story. It made me laugh and it stuck with me. All right. Don't tell that story at your day job. You can tell it to your wife or your girlfriend, but don't tell it. See what she thinks of that story. See what she thinks about the incentives in that story. But don't tell it at work. All right, the next section of the episode, we're going to talk about how the market for ALTA surveys is broken. And so I have several ways it's broken. Give me a minute. I'm going to just number these so I can rattle off the number for you guys as we go, so you can keep track. I'm just going to pause the recording for a minute. How's the market broken? I've got 8 ways. There's probably more than 8, but these are the 8 that I could think of. There's probably more than 8 ways that the ALTA survey market is broken. Number 1, clients misunderstand or misuse ALTA surveys. Once a month, people call my office asking for an ALTA survey. He said, I need an ALTA survey. I said, okay, well, I know that's what you think you need, but you might not. I said, I tell them, are you buying or selling a piece of commercial real estate? Are you financing it with a loan? Is the loan asking for the survey exception to be removed from the title insurance policy? Is the title insurance company requiring an ALTA survey? If you can't answer yes to all 4 of those questions, you don't need an ALTA. You might need a boundary survey, or you might need a boundary and topographic survey, but you don't need an ALTA necessarily. People just misunderstand what they are and what they're for. Even surveyors. I teach about ALTA surveys pretty regularly at conferences. I teach surveyors all the time. They can't answer the question, what's the purpose of an ALTA? Which is crazy. Number 2, the client relationship is transactional. Almost always. I've never had somebody I've done an ALTA survey for in my 25-year career ever come back and ask me for a second. Not counting updates. The market doesn't have to be that way. If commercial real estate brokers or title insurance companies or banks had a different set of incentives, I think they would build relationships. They would cultivate relationships, long-term relationships with good land surveyors. The market is transactional because the players have bad incentives and nobody cares about quality. So if you don't care about quality, well, I still think there's reasons to have a long-term relationship, even if all you care about is price. But if you don't care about price, there's not a strong driving force to cultivate long-term relationships. Number 3, buyers aren't cautious or suspicious like they need to be. There's a lot of unsophisticated people buying real estate. Real estate is complicated. And there's a lot of things that can go sideways that people don't understand, especially about boundary and land title. So buyers just aren't careful enough. I see this all the time. I talk to buyers all the time that just were not careful enough, and now they have a mess on their hands. Real estate brokers, this is number 4. Real estate brokers don't properly represent their clients. They have a strong fiduciary duty to protect their buyers. Real estate is complicated and nuanced, and that's why we license real estate brokers, and then the real estate brokers don't do their job because they have very strong, perverse financial incentives. And I don't necessarily, I was going to say I don't blame them. I do blame them because part of being a professional is doing the right thing even when it is against your own financial interest. But I understand because that's the way the market has been set up. Number 5, banks and title insurance companies don't care about quality, or they don't know how to assess it. I know people at the banks don't. Occasionally, you'll get an experienced title officer that has a half an idea how to read an ALTA survey, but most of the time you don't. I have title companies, tell me stupid stuff like they don't like my north arrow, or they don't like my font on my ALTA survey, when what they need to be worried about is what's the level of risk and uncertainty in the boundary. Like, they don't read any of my boundary survey notes, but they're gonna nitpick, the symbol I'm using for my found monuments. It's ridiculous. They share that in common with a lot of county surveyors. Number 6, land surveyors provide ALTA the land surveyors that provide ALTA surveys are often ignorant, incompetent, or negligent. I know that's going to offend some people, but it's the truth. I rarely see a quality ALTA survey hit my desk that's been done by another survey company. I know there are a few. There are a few good survey companies out there that understand what an ALTA is and know how to do it properly, but I would say 95% of the ALTA surveys I see don't even meet the basic requirements of the spec. There's no least squares adjustment. They haven't shown all the physical features within 5 feet of the property line. They haven't analyzed the adjoiner deeds. They're garbage. And they're garbage because they're bought on low bid. And you know what? That's nobody else's fault but our fault as land surveyors, because we allow that crap to continue. Number 7, sellers don't want the land surveyor to discover problems or potential problems. If you think about it, to some extent, the seller has an incentive to hire an ignorant land surveyor, because if there is a potential problem discovered, they aren't going to sell. They want a surveyor that is not going to find problems. As a general rule, I've been a handful of times in my 25-year career where I've worked with a sophisticated seller that bought an ALTA survey early so they could identify potential problems and get them fixed. That's a pretty sophisticated seller, though. I don't run across them very often. And number 8, I should do a PYB OTM extra to talk about this a little bit, but I'll mention it briefly here. Number 8 is that land surveyors don't have enough insurance coverage. Most of the liability in a commercial real estate transaction, when it comes to the boundary and title issues, are pushed to the land surveyor through the ALTA survey. And everybody think that's, people assume that's going to save their bank. And the problem is the land surveyor doesn't typically have enough insurance to make you whole. A lot of surveyors work with a $1 million policy. There's maybe 20, 25% have a $2 million policy. That's what we have. Some surveyors have no commercial liability insurance at all. On most commercial real estates and transactions in California, a $1 million policy is probably not going to cover the loss in value of a major problem. So we don't make land surveyors get enough insurance. I would say in California, land surveyors should have a $10 million insurance policy for an ALTA survey. Now, here's the problem. I can't go get a $10 million insurance policy. But if we required surveyors to actually have enough insurance to cover the cost of their boo-boos on an ALTA survey, what would happen is our insurance companies would start taking a way harder look at the way we do ALTA surveys. So that part of the market is also broken. What are the consequences of this broken market for ALTA surveys that we operate in? I've got 4. One consequence is ALTA surveys are awarded, or surveyors are selected for ALTA surveys using low bid. Almost always. It's almost always low bid. If you can do an ALTA survey for $200 cheaper than me, you will get the survey. And I'm not talking about 30% or 40% or 50%. I'm talking about if you could be 2% cheaper. So there's almost always no concern for quality of the survey. You're never going to hear from this client again because the commercial real estate industry is highly transactional, and real estate brokers and title insurance companies and banks don't build long-term relationships with quality surveys. So it's a transactional marketplace. It's hard to compete because there are a myriad of ways you can cut corners on a boundary survey, and other companies will do it. They will undercut you. So it's just hard to compete and be honest. And then the powerful parties in the transactions involved in these transactions will act in alignment with their bad incentives. Don't forget. Remember the 2 guys buying and selling bras for the Army, right? Selling bras to the Army and buying bras for the Army. They have bad incentives, right? And they were ignorant. Title companies have become way too concentrated and have too much market power. The banks are ignorant, and the real estate brokers, both the seller and the buyer's real estate brokers, have a very strong financial incentive to paper over problems and get the transaction closed. There's really bad and very powerful bad incentives from the perspective of what the buyer and the bank really need in the long run. And if you do enough ALTA surveys, you will see these bad incentives in action. Like you can see how they influence. Once you understand them, you can see how they influence the actions of the parties as the transaction unfolds. So what are some best practices for you? If you're in, and look, most of us can't get completely out of this market. I still occasionally do an ALTA survey, a couple times a year. I'll do a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 ALTA survey. So most of us can't avoid it. What can you do? If you're going to compete in this broken marketplace, what are some best practices? Number 1, remember these relationships are transactional. What that means is you got to get all your value right now today. Don't believe the real estate broker. I know she's pretty and she's, tan and has long, wavy hair, whatever color you prefer. But don't believe her when she says she's going to bring you another survey next week, because she's not. You got to price in all your profit on the first survey, because these relationships are transactional. You also don't put these surveys in front of surveys for long-term clients, because it's stupid to do that. Don't put a survey for a transactional client, even if she's pretty. Use your brains, surveyors, ahead of a transaction for a utility company that you do $300,000 a year worth of work for, because that would be a dumb decision. You got to remember the relationships are transactional. Second best practice is find out, you have to figure out a way to compete honestly, or just be dishonest like most people that do ALTA surveys. But that's not what I would encourage you on this podcast. So you got to find a way to compete honestly. How do you do that? I'll tell you how we do it. Now, I'm not saying this is going to work for you, but this is how we do it. So we do other surveys guys are afraid of. So we'll do ALTA surveys of properties with a water boundary, or surveys where you need to do a section breakdown. A lot of surveyors won't touch stuff like that because they're afraid, or it's too much work. If you call me to get a quote on an ALTA survey for an ALTA survey on a parcel that has been surveyed and has monuments in, I will not give you a quote. I won't. Because it's going to be too easy for somebody else to do 2 monument tango. And I know that, and I don't think in 5 years I've gotten one survey, maybe one survey in 5 years I've gotten that was on a map. So we do ALTA surveys of parcels that are not mapped or monumented, because those are hard and other surveyors are afraid. We tackle large surveys in short time frames. And sometimes I tell people I get $25 or $35 or $45,000 for an ALTA survey. I tell the surveyors that, and they think I'm lying because they're doing them for $6,500. Yeah, guys, I don't do ALTA surveys of 7-Elevens. Like, if you call me and need an ALTA survey of the 7-Eleven, I'm probably not your guy. Now, I can do an ALTA survey of 2,600 acres of almonds. That I can do. We do that kind of stuff. I could do an ALTA survey of your power plant. I can do an ALTA survey of your 800-acre cattle ranch. Sectionalized land and rugged terrain. Like, yeah, we can do those. So we do large, complicated surveys in a short turnaround time. Our standard is 10 days. We can take it down to 5 days if people got enough money. We've learned to give people ballpark price right out of the gate. I don't do ALTA survey proposals, detailed proposals, until people are ready to cut the deposit check. I've just learned. People call up, I just tell them, hey, I don't do ALTA surveys for less than $20,000 ever. And that eliminates 90% of the people looking for an ALTA survey, because somebody will do it for $6,500. By the way, I'm deadly serious about that. We do not do ALTA surveys here for less than $20,000. So I just tell people it's at least $20,000. And if they send me a street address or something, a title report, I'll look at it for 5 minutes, and I can get them within a few $1,000s of the actual price. So we do that right out of the gate because that just eliminates a lot of the tire kickers. And I mentioned this we don't prepare a proposal until people are ready to pay a deposit. Even then, I get burned. So even then, I have people tell me I'm ready to send the deposit check, and I say, all right, and I prep the scope and put it in the agreement, and then they say, 5 hours later they email me and say, oh, hey, somebody called me and they're going to do it $500 cheaper. But I try and delay that preparation of the proposal till the absolute last moment possible, because I know people are shopping around. What did we talk about today? Quick review. We defined some terms. We talked about why ALTA surveys are important. We talked about following the money, right? You got to remember the person paying for the ALTA survey is not the person that ultimately benefits from it. You got to drill down 2 or 3 levels, right? But remember, the bank is the ultimate beneficiary. We talked about the 8 ways the market is broken. And don't forget the 25-year-old guy buying the bras and the 25-year-old guy selling the bras for the army, right? People have bad incentives. We talked about the consequences of the broken market. This is a tough market to be in, land surveyors. Right? People paying for the surveys want them on low bid. The bank isn't really assessing the quality. And title insurance companies have concentrated market power. It's a sucky market for land surveyors. And then we briefly talked about some best practices, some things you can do if you're going to compete in the market to try and make it less sucky. All right, that's a wrap. Next episode, we're going to talk about, does buying a new tool make a new professional service? That's a mistake that I see survey organizations make. They buy the latest gizmo and hand it to some 25-year-old kid and think they're going to set up a new service line, new professional service. It's a horrible mistake, and it's not fair to the young men and women that get put in that position by their management teams. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. That is going to be a bonus episode. So it'll be available on Patreon to our supporters, or if you want to pay $10 for the episode, you can do that. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. As we close out the episode, we just want to give you guys a few reminders. First, we want to let you know where you can find the podcast episodes. The podcast home on the web is at my personal website, landonblake.com. If you head there and look under the Learn menu, you'll find a link for the podcast. That homepage for the podcast has all of the episodes. You can download those in MP3 format if you'd like, or read the show notes. You can also find the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music. So if those are your preferred, one of those is your preferred distribution channel, you can find the podcast there. We also want to let you guys know, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, you can reach out to me, sunburn.surveyor@gmail.com. You can also send me questions, comments, thank yous, topic suggestions for the podcast. I regularly get that kind of feedback from listeners, and I dig it. I appreciate hearing from you guys, so I encourage you to do that.
We also have a Patreon page. If you cruise over to Patreon, you can search for On Point Workshops, and you will find the podcast there. You can, for a small monthly donation, I believe right now it's $10 a month, you can support the podcast and get access to what we call PYB OTM Extras. So those are extra videos, short audio files, and even full episodes of the podcast. And that support on Patreon allows me to keep Carly around. Carly is the fantastic young lady that helps me edit the podcast and maintain the podcast website. We'd like to keep her around, so we appreciate your support on Patreon if you're able to do that. And thank you for being a listener.